Welcome back to Pulling Focus. I'm Ryan. Today I have Dave Baeumler from Red Hat. He is a creative lead on their brand strategy team. Red Hat is a leader in open source software, and Dave has an extensive history in creative production, which I'm really excited to dive into today. So thanks for being here.
Oh my God, thanks so much for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, to get us started, for the people who don't know you, just tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, thanks. I've been in production for forever, like 30-something odd years. So I went to a film school, like small experimental film school, and right out of that, I started my own production company in California, where we did like corporates and television commercials, that kind of local stuff. It was a lot of fun, but like after a couple years, me and my buddies who were doing it were like, let's sell everything off and be in a punk band and just tour around the West Coast, which was also awesome. But then, I decided to get a real job, and I moved to North Carolina, sort of sight unseen, and I got a job over at Centerline, which is a digital agency, a creative agency. And I was there for 20 years. I was their first employee, and then I stayed there for 20 years through many iterations. And then about 7.5 years ago, I moved over to Red Hat, because a lot of things I was doing at Centerline was enterprise B2B technology companies. So Red Hat is a software company, as you mentioned, in Raleigh, and so it just made a whole lot of sense. It was like the world I knew.
Yeah. Tell me about your histoy in shooting film and
Yeah.
what things you're working on with that.
Yeah, so I also, outside of my work world, I'm an experimental filmmaker. I play at lots of festivals and galleries around the world. I've been doing that, again, also for like 30 years. And from a lot of that career, I was shooting on film. I had like several 16 millimeter Bolexes and a Super 16 Bolex that I really like. But then also for a while at Centerline, we got an Airflex 535, so we were shooting on 35 all the time. And, I was just so in love with the film image, and it's just got just a totally different feeling. We used to have to always, like back in the day, say like, because obviously it also costs a lot more, so you'd show a client like, here's what things look like on film, and here's how they look like on like this terrible 3-chip camera that back in the day, and they were like, oh well, I'm going for film, so we would sell film all the time. And then like the high def cameras came out, and 4K camera, and you show the two and they're like, well, that video camera looks better than the film camera. I'm like, no, it doesn't. No, please stop talking. But it really, even as good as the video image gets and how well you can emulate film, there's still something great about going back and shooting with film, because it's just got an ineffable quality that you're not going to get anywhere else. And then also, you sort of try. Everybody tries harder when you're shooting on film. I don't know why it is. It's like, I think because every tick of that gear is money, and so everybody's thinking about like, this has to be the best take. This has to be the one. We're not going to do 10 of these. We're not just going to keep spraying and praying. We're going to really be intentional on what shots we're getting, what angles we're getting, what coverage we're getting, how many takes we're doing, and people are just on their toes the whole time. And so like I think that those projects just sing a lot more just by the medium itself.
Yeah, that's cool. And what are some of the things that you were working on, like at Centerline? Like, what was your involvement in some of those creative projects?
Yeah, so I started out as an editor, and then I was like, well, I can also write, and I can also direct, and then so I just like started doing a little bit of everything, especially for companies like Ericsson. We were doing things for Siemens, and then IBM became our major client. And I was doing a ton of things for like their mainframe division, or like basically every division. And so I ended up as the VP of creative at Centerline by the end. And so I would be working on anything from like big video projects. Like we did a thing for the 50th anniversary of the mainframe, where we interviewed mainframe customers from all over the world and did mini docs on like all these different customers, to like doing event stuff, experiential, just kind of like a little bit of everything.
Yeah. And your experience doing a little bit of everything is part of the reason why I wanted to have you on, so that we could talk about how you approach some of these creative projects and decide what they're best fit for, where they kind of fit in the funnel.
Yeah.
Red Hat in particular has a really robust catalog of not just videos, but all the different creative that your teams are responsible for. And they all kind of fit in their own buckets. And so I kind of want to get into how you think about those different buckets and then how content kind of fits in each. So maybe we can start around some of the more video-centric stuff and then kind of spiral out from there. But when you have a project and you're thinking of an idea or you're coming up with something, at what point are you thinking like this is going to be better to go for something more authentic, like a documentary style piece, or something that's more scripted and planned out, like the awesome commercials that you guys make?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's funny. I have this sort of funny idea about brand storytelling, and I actually don't even love the word storytelling, but we'll use it. Where a 3-act, what we think about is like a big 3-act kind of story. Is really hard to tell in today's media landscape, especially with social and all these things. It's like hard to just encapsulate a whole story. And so I was always like, well, what is a story supposed to do? It's really just supposed to be a way of injecting emotion to get you to remember facts, right? So like, you can tell people all day that wearing a seatbelt is gonna, save your life 90% of the time. But if you have a story about your uncle who went through the windshield of a car, everybody's going to be like, oh, I'm going to wear my seatbelt now, so I'm like, okay, but if it's hard to tell a long 3-act story in today's landscape, and I still want people to have like a memorable emotional experience, like what are other forms to do that? And the other form that pops to my mind is a song, right? Because a song has, it's very catchy, very memorable, and it also has like a lot of parts that can be componentized. You have the hook, you have the verse, you have the chorus, you have the bridge. And so I kind of think about sometimes not making a brand song, because that's death, but like what content sort of fits in those buckets in my mind? What is hook content? Like what is that headline or tagline or billboard kind of content that's just supposed to like grab people's attention? It's provocative, it's cool. What is the verse content? Which is usually like aligning to a customer's problems or the opportunities they want. It's the kind of like storytelling part of a song where you're like, hey, this bad thing happened to me. What am I going to do about it? And so I always put like stuff in that bucket when I'm like trying to think of, that part of the funnel. And then consideration phase. And then like the chorus is where you start to introduce your solution, right? Like you're getting head nods, it's benefit solution stuff, it's some product stuff. And then bridge stuff is just like throw a wild card out there, right? Just like something experiential or some crazy activation. And so not that I do this like every day where I'm like, what is the song that I have to try to figure out for this, asset? But it's a good way to organize in my head, where am I going to place things? Where are they going to live along the customer journey? And what's their job to do, right?
Yeah, so, that is such a fascinating analogy. And when we think about the stories that we tell, we structure them kind of in the same way in those contained videos. So the documentaries that we make, our formula really is that hook in the first 10 to 15 seconds, and then you work your way through it just like you would in a song or through a customer journey. So that's fascinating to me to hear the way that you think about it and to describe it in terms of a song. I'm curious, how does your team measure the effectiveness of some of these things? Because it's not always views. Sometimes it's about a little bit more than that.
For sure. There was a great guy on my team named Wes who at one point had come up with this amazing algorithm of engagement. And we would score, like all the types of YouTube metrics, like you'd score shares and likes and all those kind of things. And we would come up with a star system for every piece of content to say like, this plus this plus this gives it this many points and this many stars. And that was sort of an interesting idea, and it was like fun to like be able to like, bake off what content was working against what content. But when you then go to the business unit or an executive and say like, this piece of content got 3 stars, they're like, what is it? Like they don't care. Did it provide funnel? Are you getting conversions? Like what are you actually driving towards? So we know that not all of our content, unless people are on the website and they've signed in, like, or you make them, go through a gate, you're not going to get like that really clear, conversion, one value or marketing touch value. But what you can do is we like to measure something called brand salience. And John Lane, who's one of the strategists, really thought about this for a long time on our team. And brand salience is simply a fancy way of saying the search engine in your mind when you're not in the market to buy something. So you're not buying a car every day. Like, what is it? Like 70% of people are never in market for the thing that they're eventually going to buy. So Toyota's still spending a lot of money to convince you to remember Toyota when you do need a car. And so the same with Red Hat. Like, you might not be in the market for enterprise software, but we're going to do everything we can so that when that buying opportunity comes up, oh, we're among the 3 or 4 people in your mind in these different categories, like hybrid cloud, AI. I mean, everybody wants to be in AI, et cetera, et cetera. So what we do is we do a lot of brand survey work, which can be, a bit expensive and can be tedious because you're actually talking to people and learning about their recall, their aided and unaided recall, and then finding out, okay, does Red Hat move the needle when we talk about this in a big way, like say for a few quarters? Does that needle move on those things? Then we sort of know if what we're doing is working, rather than just the views and everything else. So it's a bit more complicated, but I think it's richer data.
And how does the creative team or the strategy team interact with the survey team? Like, are you guys getting reports back from these folks that say, here are where these metrics have moved, and then you're trying to digest and work through that? Or is this more collaborative of a process?
Yeah, well, those brand strategists are on the same team I'm on. And that's, like one part of the data story. And then, then there are other people who are looking at different types of data. They're like literally looking at the conversions, their people's paths on the website, what's marketing touch. So then marrying those things together. So there are these like handoffs or these like meetings of the minds where people come together and we all look at the data together. So so that's fascinating.
So just coming from a production background and throughout your entire career, like you've seen tremendous growth, and now you're at a point where you're focusing on so much of that strategy. What's something that you've learned at this strategy level that surprises you or was unexpected when it comes to understanding how people interact with creative at different stages in the funnel?
That's a great question because there's so many times. So we had this documentary series called Open Source Stories that I think everybody who worked on it loved, everybody who saw it loved.
I love those pieces.
It was one of the reasons I came to Red Hat, and there were many people, like not even just creatives, but people who were like engineers who said like, I was so excited about Red Hat because I saw this open source story documentary about this and this and this. But one thing that was sort of surprising to me is that they didn't perform in like the traditional way. Like, if you look at their view count, stuff like that, I was always like, why are they only getting this many views? And of course, like, you can juke view numbers by throwing a lot of cash behind it, but like organically, why is it not performing? And again, I think it can be really difficult to be in that sort of almost like entertainment space, that content marketing entertainment space, when you just don't have like a big megaphone at a certain point. So you have to, so that was actually really depressing for me to realize, because I was like, this is great content. This should be seen by more people, not just because my team made it, but because it's just really good. And I guess I'm always like, how do we make sure that the stuff that is priority to the business has that same element of the content marketing that I love to make and have it infused? Because what the business unit will say is like, why are you making open source stories? Why aren't you making OpenShift stories, which is one of our products? And I'm like, well, we do make stuff for all our software brands, but what I want to do is make sort of open source stories for those brands, or at least like bring emotion and character into those stories, so that we're talking about products and it's getting sort of the juice from the BUs so that it gets seen, but then also it's still got those like human emotional elements that I think are key from things like open source stories.
Yeah. Why do you think that those emotional parts of these stories are so important to the success of the content? Because that's a big platform that we talk to a lot of other marketers about, is not everything is like the fire sale commercial type
Yeah,
content. You need things for different parts of your
Yes,
funnel,
yeah.
and you need a different way to connect to your customers to make that brand recall.
Yeah.
I love the search engine of your mind idea, and I'm probably going to steal that
Yeah,
idea.
it's not mine. But
I love it. I love it. And that is a big thing that we spend a lot of time talking to our prospects and even active customers about, is like, even if the view count is lower than some of the stuff that you're throwing piles of cash behind, those people are probably deeper in the funnel, or they've made a deeper connection with your brand
Yes.
as a result of engaging with it.
Yeah.
So just curious your opinion, like why is the first thing that you said about it was about the emotional connection. Why is that something that's so important to you?
I think it's important because it's important to customers, because you're a person. Like, you're not a software buying robot. You know, you're not out there in the world saying, like, I'm going to buy this thing because it's like the most logical thing for me to buy. Study after study has shown we buy still on our gut feelings, on our affinity for something, on our just belief that that thing is good. And I'm really only interested in people. Like, so many times when I like want to get super excited about a product, and I can be excited that the product like saves me time or does something good for me, but I only like care about that product in and of the sort of the emotional ease that it's giving me, or like and so like we often talk about, hey, like, how does this product make someone's life easier so they can go home at the end of the day, or they don't have to spend all weekend as a sysadmin, like spend all weekend trying to debug something that went wrong. You're like, how do we just take that off their plate so they can see their loved ones and go to soccer games and do all that kind of stuff? Like, that's the emotional human part. Like, that's what at the end of the day people care about. And I think like trying to make those connections is super important. I worked on I maybe jumping the gun here a little bit, but I was working on this one story. We had this program called Open Innovation Labs, and it was basically like almost like a residency program, like 6 weeks. Red Hatters got together with your team, and you solved a problem that you were having, or you were trying to like do. And I was like, oh, 6 weeks, you don't know really what's going to happen. I'm like, this is like a reality show. And I pitched an idea to like the team and the group that runs those innovation labs, and I said, like, let's do it like a reality show, and we'll really like focus on not like the technical problems they're solving. Yes, we'll talk about that, but like just like a reality show, like have little testimonial booths. Like, what are they going through? Like, how hard is this thing to solve in these 6 weeks? And it was with UNICEF, and we were down in Colombia for some of it and up in New York. And it was fascinating because these were real characters. Like, this one guy was like really a fascinating dude. And you were just like, this was a great story. And so being able to weave like a 6-episode series, 4 to 6 episode series around that, and tell that story, it told the story of Open Innovation Labs better than anything else. It was because of how the characters grew and changed over the course of those 6 weeks. And like, does anybody remember I'm sure they remember what they built and like how well it did, but people are going to remember that this guy was struggling with this and this woman was struggling with this. It was really fun to make, and I think it had much more of an emotional and visceral impact than just a piece.
It's the human connection impact element of it, and I think a lot of brands, especially those in tech, struggle with the humanization element of some softwares or programs or products that they create. Because they're not thinking customer first, they're thinking about the tech, or they're thinking very specifically about a niche problem that they're trying to solve. It's like an engineer versus a marketer or a strategy person. And I think what we've seen at some of these larger organizations is these marketers, as they get higher up, they are more disconnected from the creative, and they are forced to think of it more binary. Numbers, metrics, that's how they measure this success, and they kind of forget the magic of everything that you just described. That humanization and connection that people can make with your brand is what creates that brand recall and drives that connection to the brand, so that people want to be your customer, which is what you need in the end, right? That's how everybody wins. So is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to talk about, or a project that's coming up that you're really excited about?
Well, I think one thing that I'd love to talk about is just how creative team gets excited about a project. Like, I might say to them, hey, we need to do a security series because security's hot, and like we need to like do this and that. But like, if I just told them like, we're doing a security series and it's going to be this and this and this, and it needs to have this many things and it's 2 minutes long, like they wouldn't get behind that. They wouldn't have fun. So one thing that I know I always do, and I always try to make sure that anyone who's managing creatives really learns this, is that give those creatives as much time investment, enough rope basically to really dig in and make that project their own. Because ultimately, it's probably going to be a talking head on camera, but they came up with the style, the informality of it, or like the type of questions, or they're going to come up with all that, and they're going to love that show way more than if they were just told like, hey, here's this guy's coming in 2 minutes, set this, set these 3 lights and go. Give creatives as much freedom to come up with these solutions themselves, and they work hard and they love their jobs. I was really happy that like very few people have left the video department at Red Hat over the time I've been there, not because of me, but like I think because they get to work on really fun projects. They get to make them their own. I think that's just huge when you're working with creatives, and even if you're a client and working with a creative, like let the creatives do some of their creative stuff, and don't like be completely dictatorial in like how you're telling them how to go about it. I think helps.
What do you think is the business case for that, or the output of giving the creatives enough space to flourish and do what they're best at? What's kind of the output or the ROI from a business perspective?
Yeah, I was doing this whole deck one time about the ROI of creativity, because there are all these like people out in the world that have done great decks on that, and like why something beautiful is actually more captivating. But I think it's all the things that you and I have really been talking about, is if it's well crafted, if it has some soul, if it's different, like people make quirky stuff when they're given like the license to make quirky stuff, and the quirky stuff's the fun stuff, and it's the stuff that's going to differentiate your brand, and it's gonna make your customers love you more. The ones that get it will love it.
Yeah, the ones that get it will love it. That is an excellent piece. I think that is so much of everything that we have created at Press Rec, but the stuff that we love and we share internally, and the stuff that we love about your work and that of your team, is that we get it and we see it and we feel it.
Yeah.
Another thing that's come up as I've been hearing, we've talked a lot about kind of the humanization of this and the realism in some of this content, but you guys also make a lot of commercial content that is sometimes limited to like a hard 30 seconds or 15 seconds, and those have to be creative in their own right. My question is, how do you make a commercial that needs to sell a product? How do you give that human connection or that emotional impact in such a short time? Or how do you think about it from a strategic level, and then maybe how do your creators think about it?
Yeah, well, I think one thing is that we don't typically make ads at the product level. We might make a hype video for a product launch or something like that, but if we're doing like that 30 to 60 second thing, it's normally at a brand level, and it's usually is about some like higher brand purpose. Like, so our brand mantra right now is "No one innovates alone." So that is a human story, and so I think like that's where we approach the sort of the ad buy kind of scenario, which I think is interesting, because I think, again, like brand is sort of lifestyle. Ads, when you're sort of at that, like when you're just blasting out to millions of people who don't know you, you do just want to make like a brand connection, and not just like, hey, OpenShift can do this one thing, or Enterprise Linux can do this other thing. It's really like, hey, we're in this together. No one innovates alone. Let's all work together in a really cool way. We're here for that, And so I think that's kind of how we think about when we're going into that sort of ad space, rather than, and I guess that's more like that hook content that I was talking about before. We're not trying to get into that like verse or chorus content. We're just like, hey, come along with us. This is fun. Like, whatever Keith Richards is going to play.
Yeah, right. I think what you described is where a lot of marketers get lost. They get stuck in the product aspect of it, or the fire sale, Labor Day or $5.99, 0% financing of like the real power of content and advertising really, to us, lives at that brand level. And if you want to create that recall or create that connection, you do that from a brand level and not from a product level. And so I think that a lot of folks just sort of get stuck in the day-to-day of the product stuff, because there is constant innovation. There are new things coming out, and you need to promote those things, but you just do them differently, or you attack those problems differently. Last question that I have is for other marketers at other, big teams who are watching this, what's the one thing that you would want them to take away, or one lesson that they could learn from you, from your career, your trajectory from production to where you are at a strategy level, or like what's one piece of advice that you would want to share?
Well, one thing I've done pretty consistently, from Centerline and through Red Hat, is I make sure to do a weekly critique session where the team has to come up, find things out in the world, creative out in the world that they like. Or don't like, whatever, you bring in something you hate. And we spend a half an hour in a room with a group of folks, and we go around the table and we score every piece of creative on 2 metrics. One, how original, how well executed was it? Did it get your juices flowing? And then what is the content? What is the content score? Did it achieve what we think the creative brief was? Let's imagine what they were in the room trying to solve. And give it the content score. So everybody goes around the room and gives it a creative and content score. And it's hilarious when it's the creative is way up here and the content's way down here, really low, or vice versa. Because then you have these philosophical discussions about what is good creative? Is it good just because it's magical and fantastic if it didn't do anything for the business? Or is it, can a boring piece be great because, man, I remember the heck out of that, whatever it is. And having that weekly discussion not only is a great sort of masterclass, or continuing education to talk about that, but your team also aligns on your own sort of what we like as a team. And the camaraderie that develops just through those conversations of, hey, I know that person hated that, I liked it. Let's kind of talk about how our different opinions, or hey, we all agreed that this was the greatest thing we saw this year. We do an end of the year review on because we keep the decks, and so I would say that's worth doing. It seems like that's a half an hour out of your week. We don't need another meeting. That's the meeting you want to have, because it's so awesome and fun. It's my favorite meeting of the week, and also it really, I think, builds a team in a great way, an authentic way.
That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for coming in and coming on this. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Awesome.